Hello, everyone. We're live. Let me go and click through everything that I have to click to hide and show things. How are you guys doing?
Doing good.
So much excitement in the air.
How are you?
I'm all right. I'm good. Seattle, finally, the weather is getting nicer, so it's pretty good. It was cold and rainy, but not anymore, at least for a couple of months, and then it's back to rain.
Speaking of weather, is anyone joining the live stream from outside?
outside of Seattle, you mean?
Outside.
Oh, like
Yes.
outside.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's too nice to
okay.
be inside.
Yeah.
I'm glad you understand. Here, you take a quick look. That's my porch. And now
Yeah.
and now it's gone.
But back the virtual thing. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
all right. So what are we going to talk about today? So we'll talk about security for agents and tools. So things like what do we need to be worried about? How is the security for enterprises different than for building on SaaS? How are people calling the tools? Is it locally or remotely? How do agent perform the things, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll let Christian maybe take it off and like start the discussion. I know we have some like questions that we wanted to go through, so maybe you start us off, and of course anyone in the comments chime in if you have questions, ideas, if you've gone through this before. Let us know your thoughts.
Please jump in, people who's watching. I think let's start with, MCP is all the rage. People are talking about it. At least what we're seeing, not just from the internet, but actually talking with customers internally here at Solo. But certainly from any of the social media, anything you're watching, anything on the AI, MCP is overhyped, I would say. But what's interesting when we start to look at it in terms of enterprise adoption is that I think we all know that MCP originated from the Anthropic folks, and they wanted to make it easier for people to connect in tools to Cloud Desktop. And so what you would do is you'd go search the catalog for these tools that somebody wrote, and you would plop a blob of JSON into their little configuration file, and then it would basically go pull down these node files or Python files and run them locally. And like if you thought about what is an MCP server acted kind of like one-to-one with the client, almost as like a forwarding proxy for that Cloud Desktop. Now, there's a lot to unpack with what the security model looks like there, but it's effectively a one user, one desktop client, a trusted host system. Now, when we start to look at how an enterprise is going to adopt this, it's probably not going to be that model. It's definitely not going to be that model. Enterprises are already used to exposing capabilities. I mean, we can call them tools, but capabilities in their environments through APIs. So they probably have a lot of APIs, a lot of governance around that, and they're probably not just going to flip the model that they've been building for the last 15 years to, okay, why don't you go build some MCP thing that can directly access all their databases? That's probably not going to happen. So we need to think about what does the MCP server look like in an enterprise environment, which is multi-tenant, already has existing APIs and capabilities that are exposed to the enterprise, and what does MCP do to help with that? And the answer is actually nothing. MCP exposes an RPC protocol, and that's it. It doesn't handle authorization, authentication, telemetry, guardrailing, any of the newer style or attacks that come into focus because of the LLM and the way MCP describes its tools. So there's a new style of attack, not just hitting APIs, but naming and spoofing, rug pulling of MCP servers and all this stuff. So a new class of attacks. MCP doesn't really address any of that, unfortunately, right now. So I think that's the backdrop. So I think what we want to talk about today. I don't know if anybody else has comments or thoughts.
So today's gonna be fun because I think there's so much. I think there's gaps in how you mentioned, I think MCP was modeled after like language server protocol, which actually when you and I were back at Red Hat, like that's what all the developer hub and all that kind of hosted IDE stuff was based on, right? And I think that use case as it scales to enterprise usage is going to shift much more from single user trusted environment. I mean, even that is a bit of a stretch nowadays, because if you just go download some like random like tool server, right, and executing within the context of your, basically your user account on the local host, right? Like that's a big deal. I think for most enterprises, and maybe something that to get hold of. So I think we'll probably talk about it. I know that you and I have chatted about this separately, like that idea of like how much usage will actually shift from local usage to remote usage, right? And then also like, is there a pattern there maybe developing of like local to remote or remote to local kind of thing? But just to step back, because like I think you talked about this in the very beginning of what we're seeing out there and like the security landscape of this, I think that when you look at any layer in isolation, there's important considerations there. But then it's also interesting how the security approaches, they layer on one another, right? So like when I think about this, where we started our journey is in companies actually consuming LLMs, whether they're hosted third-party LLMs like OpenAI or Azure, or Gemini, whatever, right? Or they are they're self-hosting, like an open source model in their own infrastructure. But either way, when you're consuming those models, there's a set of sort of security and sort of governance considerations, right? And that was kind of the AI gateway use case. Then there was, hey, if I'm hosting maybe internally inferencing and I have like a platform where I'm exposing that to internal teams, then on the inbound side to those LLMs, there's a whole other consideration around security that's related, but also some distinct concerns there. And then if we start to think about developing agents, at the end of the day, an agent is consuming an LLM, but it's also consuming tools, right? So then there's like another, like there's some overlap there, and then some new security requirements, as you mentioned out with tool calling and MCP and this type of thing. And then when we expand to agent, right, there's just yet another set of consideration, right? And so I think that what we should definitely do maybe a succinct blog on is just talking about how like the common, if you go implement onesie twosie, these security considerations in isolation in all these areas, you're going to end up with this like jigsaw architecture where you have gaps and you have inconsistent enforcement. But if you build it up as a layered like platform approach of how you're protecting against these, I think it'll be way more sustainable, and you'll have way better like provable coverage of the common threat scenarios. So it'll be interesting as we talk about things today, like at an end of the day, an agent is consuming an LLM. Some of the guardrails and protections that are there, especially as an agent refers to a user prompt, right? You're protecting against prompt injection or that kind of thing. Like, what does that look like for that agent then calling a downstream LLM to do stuff? So yeah, I think there's some good stuff there.
Yeah. For some reason, when you guys were talking about it, I was like, I always remember the hey, just go and if you like, grab this script, curl to it, and just run it magically on your machine. So this is kind of like in a similar vein. The only difference is now an LLM has access to arbitrarily, in a way, right, install stuff, right, and then go and run whatever it deems it needs to run. So yeah, it is kind of scary. It definitely important thing to figure out how to do properly, right?
For sure. Like one of the OWASP like top 10s for Gen AI stuff was interesting. It was excessive agency is one of the top 10, right? And so while we're talking about agents, this is very relevant because it used to be like, hey, if you're using like a coding copilot, right? Or you're asking for some like scripting logic to go execute something, don't just blindly accept the output from an LLM, and then invoke it, which would give that LLM excessive agency in that process. You need some additional guardrails or protections there. But literally, when we're talking about an agent acting autonomously, and independently based on a goal a user presents, it is actually doing that, right? So how are you protecting and how are you satisfying or controlling that threat vector?
Yeah, looks like there needs to be a list of tools and or MCP tools, vulnerabilities and or just like the OWASPs, right? Top 10,
I mean,
whatever
you see that
security issues,
happening
right?
everywhere. People are publishing blogs
Oh yeah,
and things all the time about these potential issues. I actually saw an interesting tool come out the other day, which is basically a security scanner specifically for your tools. And I can find the link somewhere, but it like goes and looks at all of the potential ways that a developer, like someone who's created these servers, can purposefully hack you, because they for instance, by like taking advantage of scopes, of like file system scopes, and putting language and characters into the prompts, that have the opportunity to break your
Yeah.
agent. So
yeah,
things
yeah.
like that.
I think I saw the same thing. I think I saw this. They injected something into like a file or whatever that made it execute something maliciously. But yeah, it's like if you just think about running like locally, the run local scenario, right? There's a tool developer that published a server, and you run it with UVX, MPX, whatever it is. They release a new version, inject some malicious code into it. What do you do? Like, how can
Yeah.
you protect yourself?
I mean,
Right, right.
I'm in no way advocating that anyone tries to exploit chatbots, do prompt hijacking, that kind of thing. I will tell you, if you do it and post it on the internet, I'm going to laugh at it, because I actually think it's very, it's very interesting to read about these scenarios, like where people interact with chatbots and they get like 100% discount on a car or get a job offer, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So like these are funny, right? But what's interesting is, as we move from a mode where it's basically a read only, like basically we're using text generation from an LLM to give an answer to a human being, right? To that actually being an agent that now has like write capability or the ability to act autonomously. Now, like when I say like, hey, offer me a job at this thing, and then it goes and like it's connected to the HR system via an API and that kind of thing. I mean, it just gives you an idea, this interface where we used to have like a strongly secured, getting back to security topic here, like a very like a well-defined surface area of a distinct set of operations that are locked down with RBAC, right? To now a natural language interface, which is completely open-ended, right? Like you can no longer secure the front door by saying this operation is only available to these users. You know what I'm saying? It's more like it's shifting that to like, okay, like through the system prompt and the guidelines I give to this agent and the tools it has access to, that then becomes my control of security, right?
Right. And that's where things get murky with certainly with tools and MCP. There's a couple of piece of material here. We can put these into the notes or into the comments. A couple of great blogs from the Invariant Labs folks, and found this a good paper from the Amazon and Intuit folks on mitigating some of these attack vectors, in which we can talk about here in a second. Actually, I would like to, because when you start thinking about in the enterprise, when you deploy MCP servers, you're thinking about deploying them as remote servers. These are going to be probably over the HTTP transport, not standard in like you would see in cloud desktop. And so now you start to think about the LLMs calling out to these servers, and these servers having access to tools in the backend. And in an enterprise, it's probably going to be a lot of API calls. Now, thinking about those steps are similar to the way that we think about securing remote endpoints in the enterprise. So going through API gateways, if you're in Kubernetes, certainly at Solo, we've been talking a lot about service mesh, securing the transport and assigning identity, to these workload endpoints and having very fine-grained zero trust authorization policies around that.
Can you zoom in a little bit, Christian?
Yeah, I think. Let's see. Right. All right. Is that better?
Yeah, I think it's better. Yeah, thanks.
Right. So, we start to think about the HTTP transport, and there are things that we can do to help out with that. Things like TLS. Let's keep the bearer tokens secure. Things like when we're calling the upstream APIs, those APIs probably have API gateways sitting in front of them, and they have mechanisms for securing the calls to them, whether it's API keys or some sort of bearer token. The enterprise has a lot of different ways for securing those APIs. Now, the tricky part here, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts here too, is now that MCP server, if it's handling calls to these backend APIs on behalf of a user or an agent representing a user, or maybe an autonomous agent itself, what does that, because that starts to get tricky now, because if the MCP server needs to pass different tokens for different agents or different identities, then how does it do that? Does it store all of the possible combinations of identity, credentials, or do those get passed through from the MCP client on behalf of the agent or the user? Be curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so I think this is a bit of a leading question, Christian, but I'll bite. So sorry, I don't know if others in this call have been paying attention to all of the conversations happening in the community around their authorization spec. But it's been very interesting because the upstream community started with a very strict method of authorizing the user for MCP tools, and which involved token swapping. And I don't want to get too deep into it, but I do think that at a high level, the flow here should be very similar to what organizations are used to. I mean, really, it's just it should be probably something similar to OIDC, or really it fits in. Assuming you're using HTTP, it really should fit in with the exact type of auth N, auth Z that your organization is already using, right? So you have things like, so like passing through JOT tokens or using machine identity, right? And in just ensuring that whatever system that you're using, whatever client and server are able to understand your internal IDP. At least that's at the enterprise level. And I think that's where at least I'm more comfortable talking about. I think in terms of like general use MCP servers, I'm a little less of an expert. So I'll just speak from the enterprise point of view.
But honestly, like listen, when we talk about, it depends on the domain we're talking about here, right? Like there's the whole area of computer use and like maybe the consumer focused side of like how agents can augment or, kind of help humans. And then I think there is we're an enterprise and we've got 10,000 applications that we've built or bought and we're running basically, right? And like, which of these applications make more sense, or maybe net new applications I'm developing, 10,001, 10,002, make sense to build as agents, right? And in that scenario, you're going to be interacting and integrating with the same APIs your applications were. There's 10 to 15 years of experience of like the authentication authorization models you're going to use with those APIs. And you built up all the infrastructure for that, right? Like, of course, you're going to reuse the same thing, right? Like, and I think that it likely will differ from maybe what the consumer side and maybe the desktop side looks like. So I think that it is like, as we see agents actually really get deployed in like, the traditional or, most organizations today, it's the auth mechanism or the auth sort of architecture is going to look very similar to how applications do it today, in my opinion. Like,
Yeah.
for example, A2A, like when you look at like an agent card, the authorization scheme is just Open API's authorization scheme, basically, right? That's good.
Yeah, exactly. We don't want to try to reinvent
Yeah.
and do things that cause a lot of friction in the enterprise. All right, so I want to keep the conversation going around this kind of stuff, but I do want to show a demo. I do want to show how in kagent, when we're connecting up to tools, we can specify security credentials to be able to call into those tools, and then on the tool side, we can actually secure that. At KubeCon, we were, on Keith actually on the main stage talked about an MCP style gateway for tool calling, and I'll give you a little sneak preview at what that looks like. But from kagent, what we want to do is set up a tool server and be able to call into that tool server using credentials. So let's see. You should be able to see my screen, right?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. I am going to click on tools here and manage tool servers. Oh, I should have deleted that. Let me, we'll walk through that.
Yeah. While you're doing that, Ethan also mentioned in the comments that OAuth 2 defines a bunch of different authorization flows, and maybe a new one is warranted, right, in the context of agents, which is an interesting thought, right?
That is like how, in what ways is this unique or different than like machine to machine or machine initiated?
Yeah.
Right?
The only thing is that you would have to like figure out how to implement the user consent flow, right? If your agents are operating autonomously, right, how does the authorization happen, right, for the user to actually approve or not, right? But yeah.
Okay, so we have tools here in kagent. These are the out-of-the-box tools. I think in previous demos we did talk about, maybe I think Peter showed, adding additional MCP tools. But what we're going to do is we're going to add an MCP tool server. We'll call it MCP gateway tool server. And in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to point to a gateway that understands MCP and is able to secure MCP endpoints. We'll give it the URL where it's running. And then for the authorization, I'll show you the config in a second, but we've secured the endpoints and we've secured the various MCP servers in the back end. And so we need to give it a bearer token here, which we'll do. Copy and paste. So let's cross our fingers, add this server, and we'll give it a second. Hopefully it'll go discover that. Maybe we have to refresh. Okay, it did. In one of the previous demos, I showed you a tool that we added, a fetcher tool that is able to go get website information. I've also added a few other tools based on the pet store REST APIs, but if you're familiar with pet, everyone should be familiar with pet store. So I added a few of those. Now the interesting thing is, if we come here, if we look at, I can make this bigger too.
Yes. You saw me unmute my mic, so you're like, oh, he probably wants to ask that. Yeah.
If we look at
actually make the text bigger, not just the window.
Yeah, is that still not big enough?
That's great.
That looks good. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Yep. We can see in this config that we require JOT authentication authorization, and we can write policies about what tools are allowed to be called when you have this particular set of claims or token. And in this case, we're going to allow us to call the fetch tool from the fetcher MCP target server, right? And like I showed you, we have a backend fetcher MCP, and we also have a pet store MCP. So if we do that, if we have that there, so then we can only call these tools. That's why I added the authorization token. So now let's go create an agent. We'll call this the fetcher agent. Fetches websites. Uses a tool.
Hey, Christian, just so
fetch
for folks
websites.
that might not be, if they're joining and they're not familiar with kagent, like, and let me know if I have this wrong, but just to frame this, we're actually showing here is two components working together, right? Maybe like a platform layer and a connectivity layer, where you're working with a kagent, which helps people build and deploy tools, agents, and kind of bring that all together, right?
Yeah.
And and when you just registered a tool, what's kind of cool is the tool you registered was actually a gateway to other tools, basically.
That's right.
So you effectively get to zoom in or like slurp in this whole set of tools, and then you're kind of what you were just showing this is that layers on additional security and authorization and other capabilities beyond what those tool servers may even implement on their own. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Right, cool,
Thanks for setting that context. Yeah. And so now we're demonstrating creating a new agent using kagent. And this is one of the headline features, which is how quickly can you build an agent and get it out into production, get it working. And in this case, we're focusing on the important parts, which are, hey, give the agent a goal or a role that it needs to fill. In this case, we'll keep it very simple, but we'll also give it a set of tools to use to complete its goals. So if I click on add tools and I want to add that new fetch tool that we just added through the gateway, MCP gateway that we mentioned, if we add that, now we've given it a goal. It has a set of tools. We're going to say create agent. And first of all, that's as easy as it is to create agents. And now we can ask it to go do something on our behalf. Can you show me the details of website kagent.dev? And cross our fingers. So the agent should be smart enough to know that it has these tools, and it'll go do its thing. So it's calling the fetch tool, and we're getting a result. It actually slurped in the contents of that web page and is showing us that content. But now, if we had come back here to our agents, if we had a different agent, a pet store agent gets pet store info, use the pet store tool to get a pet ID 1234, or I guess I'll put that in the user prompt, get a pet. And now we'll give it a tool to be able to call into the pet store API. We'll find the one where we get the pet by ID, get this one by pet by ID, and then we'll save that. So now we have a tool. Again, we're creating a new agent that has a different goal, and we'll say create this agent. We'll come here, and now we're going to try to use it. Show me details about pet 12345. Now it will try to use this tool. We'll send it, but what we should see is that it does not have authorizations to call this tool. So the token that we gave it doesn't allow us to call this tool, and that's enforced by the gateway config that I just showed. And you can see here that the agent is bound, like it can't just start calling all these tools, even if it can see them, based on its credentials.
Yeah. So we basically moved the agent is not making any decisions of whether it can call something or not, right? That's been pushed out to the gateway to decide, right? Or well, not decide, to allow or not allow based on the tokens, right?
Right. Exactly. All right. So that's just like securing flows, securing calls to MCP tools. But now, if we talk a little bit more about, all right, that's kind of stuff that we understand. These are flows that we would expect to see in an enterprise environment. But MCP introduces newer types of opportunities for attack, and that is around very simple stuff like how do you name your MCP servers? Because at the end of the day, you're basically just giving a list of tools to the LLM and saying, hey, based on your intended goals, go figure out how to solve this problem, and here are the tools that you can use. And what's interesting about that is the LLM uses natural language, and it tries to understand what tools does it have. You describe the tools and tell the LLM about its capabilities, what it can do, what these tools can do. And because of that, because of the the prompt injection, how LLMs are vulnerable to different types of prompt injection, you find that tool names, tool descriptions, all become attack vectors for influencing the LLM to do, or influencing an agent through the LLM to do things that it probably shouldn't do. And so I'll go through a couple examples. Like I said, naming is a very big issue. Locking down and only allowing approved tools is probably a good first step. You don't want to. That's why having some central way to manage registration and discovery of tools is so critical, because you could have developers writing in whatever agent framework they want, and they're starting to pull in tools, and you have an attacker just sitting there, preying on the idea that you might mistype a name. And in this particular example, instead of finance tools, plural, finance tool is registered with the client, and that belongs to an attacker. All right, so we need some
2 minutes
way.
looking at that to figure that out, by the way, just so you know. So
exactly.
Very easy
That
mistake
was
to
the
make.
point. that was the point. The naming is so easy to overlook or mistype, and it'd be that's the easiest attack for someone to try to get an MCP server running in your environment. So I mean that's one example. Now, naming tools, maybe you have something like a few different MCP servers and their names kind of collide, and without proper authorizations in place, you can end up with a situation where you ask it to do something and it sees a number of tools, kind of similar naming, maybe by accident, maybe on purpose, but the agent or the LLM picks the wrong one. It should be maybe picking information about client patient billing, which it has access to or should have access to, and it accidentally picks a different one. And the collision comes because the names are very similar, and the descriptions are probably very similar. And this maybe it's accidental. And even though it's accidental, I think this is the next one, you can get into scenarios where accidents can lead to serious compliance issues, where maybe you're pulling data from one MCP server, and the AI decides, all right, for our next tool call, we're going to pass some of that data, and whoops, we pass it to a different tool server in a different region, and now we violated some very serious regulations. And so the point here is that naming is such a critical and important aspect to thinking about how do you set up guardrails, how do you set up security, to know that your agent doesn't just have free reign, full agency, as the OWASP top 10 describes it, to just freely make these decisions, start passing data back and forth, and get into some serious compliance issues. I'll pause there and see if anybody else has comments.
I just don't want to step on your punchline, because this is awesome, and I want to it's leading me towards this concept of curation of the tool. So if you're going there, I don't want to step on it.
I'm actually not going to make it. I'm not actually going to hit that point yet. I think that in future live streams we will have the ability to do that stronger. But yes, I'm just pointing out these are the issues, and they're very serious issues, even though they look so simple.
Yeah.
The other thing that I want to, it's similar to the naming of the functions that you were mentioning, is also the, not just the way the functions are named, but also the metadata that's associated with those functions, basically
Yeah,
the descriptions, right?
exactly.
Mm.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, there you go. Sorry.
No, perfect. No, that's the next step. If it's like server naming can be a big problem. Tool naming can cause all kinds of collisions and cause problems. The descriptions and the metadata that go along with the tool are an even bigger, area of concern. And I think that's where these folks at Invariant Labs did a really good job of describing some of this stuff. But basically that looks like, hey, you have an MCP server, it's got some tools. When I ask it to list, and I'm going to send when the agent sends the tools to the LLM and says, hey, these are the tools that you have available, it's not just the names, it's the descriptions of the tools. And in a UI, like we just saw in kagent or any UI, you might see, hey, I got this calculator tool. It does some simple arithmetic and can add a couple of numbers. But when I send this metadata to the server, the entire description will get there, right? And so if you can kind of craft a description that says, hey, and I grabbed this from the Invariant Labs blog, hey, go do some other stuff. Maybe read what's on the file system and start passing around some private keys. And, that starts to get pretty scary because it's pretty easy to hide that in a UI, especially if you're picking tools. But the whole thing gets sent to the LLM or to the AI model, and the AI model then will follow those instructions usually. And start to pass in potentially, data that it shouldn't see to an attacker. Here's an example of a similar approach, but instead of the MCP server exposing some malicious tool with this bad description, we're able to play off of other servers, where we say, hey, here's a description of a tool that says, hey, why don't you call this, a legit call to patient billing, and take that data, and anytime you call patient billing, also call this send email tool with the data that you just took. And you can dress it up to say, hey, this is super important, that anytime you do this, the user will get really mad if you don't do it, blah blah blah. You can, the prompt injection techniques here are endless, but you can, when you register a tool, it exposes that description. It can now overshadow other tools that might be already installed into the AI model, and tell the AI model to do things with those tools, and then send data to the attacker tools. The last one I'll point out is, okay, maybe you do have a registration flow, and you start going through a flow where you say, okay, these servers are approved, and once they're approved, everything should be good. Maybe we'll add some security layers to it around bearer tokens or whatever. But these MCP servers can be written in such a way that right after they get approved, they switch their descriptions at runtime. And now you have an approved description or list of tools, but then it gets into the catalog, and now at runtime you see attacker prompts. So it's interesting how natural language, which is how we interact with some of these agents, now becomes an attack vector into our AI agents. Even the things that you're not thinking about, they can slip in there. So I'll pause there, see whether there's any thoughts or.
Yeah. So sorry, I was going
Sorry.
to all my MCP clients and just removing all the tools. that I was using.
There's no
You can't lose
tool
if you
like
don't
a
play.
what's the Kelsey Hightower? No code. Forever
Yeah,
no code.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
yeah.
interesting. I want your take, Christian. I think there's kind of, I've been looking around at the different things or the different solutions appearing in this space around, this like tool aggregation and tool security and things. And another solution that I've seen is that rather than sort of having the fan out or like a wide tool um, list, you basically have a server that has only two tools, and the server's tools are list tools and execute tools, or execute tool. And so you basically completely abstract the fact that there are any tools at all into just two tools. And so I wonder, I would just wonder how you feel about that. Is that like, would that be worse, better? Because I don't know. I have some gut reactions, but
The
So is
UX
the
sounds
point?
fantastic with that approach, by the way.
Yeah.
what?
The UX of that approach sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
So is the point there just to limit the number of tools to well-known names that like then you can't just randomly inject additional servers? Is that
But
the point?
you can inject whatever you want.
But you won't see it.
You don't see it. So
Yeah.
you can't
Yeah.
limit by, right? Like it feels to me like you're just pushing the problem.
You
Yeah.
are. You're just pushing
Yeah.
it to a different layer. That's it, right? It still has to be solved somewhere, right? Whatever that execute tool, whatever arguments, parameters that execute tool gets passed in, it still needs to decide whether it should run a tool or not, right?
Yeah.
So not, I mean, it is a way to solve it, right? You're just doing it at a different layer somewhere.
But I
But
still don't get, what are you solving for with that approach?
You like models can't handle that many tools. But I also think it's sort of like,
yeah,
again, you're I'm not a data scientist. So I can't say, I don't design these models. I can't say whether or not it's better to have two tools with definitions the size of the Constitution or 20 tools with small definitions, right?
well,
I don't know.
the thing is, you still have to tell the LLM, hey, here are all the tools that you can
Yeah.
run,
Yeah.
right? But if you have two of them, you would have to figure out how to.
Well, it would just
Like
be
the
on
LLM would have
every.
to tell you, hey, I need to run a tool that adds two numbers, right? Even though you might not have that tool, or the tool name is not add two numbers, it's something else, then you would have to do that matching and figuring out whatever LLM is asking you to do to the actual tool that you have implemented that you can execute,
Well,
right?
on the other side, you could just say, hey, whenever you need a tool, every time you need something that you don't, the language there gets too complicated, but whenever you need a tool, ask this thing for the list of tools, right? And
And it would be
once,
great if that thing that you ask is not the MCP server directly, but something that is able to sanitize, and check for these types of attacks and gives you a curated list of tools that are specifically for you. You can call only these, and the descriptions, all this stuff have been checked. And, tool names don't collide, or if they do, they are announced somehow. And then you curate the list that a AI model sees.
I don't think this is how it's going to scale, right? This is completely, hot take from me, but right, I don't think it's going to scale by saying every agent I write needs to have access to the complete universe of tools. Okay, I think that is, like, we've seen in our own experience that that confuses the agent anyway, right? And then on top of that, the blast radius is huge for an exploit, right? And so I think it's more the case that people will say, instead of like Uber agents that have access to all the tools, you'll say, this agent needs this specific set of tools. If I have a larger use case, it's going to involve multiple agents, and I'll just compose at the agent layer, right?
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that gives you is multiple layers of like semantic sort of guardrails of like, this is what the agent should and should not be doing. And you're doing that localized to the tools it's integrating with, which I think gives you better security overall.
Let me posit this nightmare scenario.
All right. Actually, I got to drop.
Hey, Christian, that was awesome, man. Thanks. I learned a lot. So thanks for walking through that.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks,
all right, here's the nightmare scenario, right? Your agent doesn't know about any tools. However, it can use another agent to tell
Did
it, hey, I
Peter
need this
freeze?
tool. What's
He's
that?
back. You froze for a
Yep,
second.
Eitan, you're the one freezing.
Yeah, you're the one freezing.
Me?
We're
You were
yeah,
still
it's you.
moving.
We just did a
All
leader
right.
election and you lost, Eitan.
Or am I being gaslit? Honestly, the world.
You have a very serious face that's frozen in the live
Yeah,
stream
at
right
least
now.
it looks good. But
Yeah, it does. It
yeah,
looks like your business.
yeah. So imagine this scenario, right? You have an agent where like you ask it to do something, and the agent doesn't have access to any tools. It doesn't know about any tools, but it does have access to an agent that knows how to create tools for you.
Mhm.
So an agent will say, "Oh, I need a tool that allows me to read a file." And that would get passed on to another agent that would be like, oh, okay, I know how to write code that reads a file. It would create that tool, and then it would go and actually execute and give you back the results. So you're not even like, it's almost like you're creating the tools on demand as needed.
And I think the only time people are ever going to be comfortable with that is as they get experience with a very deterministic, like, deterministic in the context of LLMs, but like basically saying, I'm focused on this very specific problem that's very like low risk in terms of
Oh
like
yeah,
business impact.
yeah,
I'm going to deploy that. It's going to be safe for a while, right? I'm going to learn some things in the process, and I'm going to do another
yeah,
one, right? And then I think like eventually, as we scale this out, like we get to these economies of scale of sort of like agentic infrastructure where I'm not building a thing to do some things. I'm building a thing to build things to do things, right? Which I think is what you're talking about, right?
yeah.
Like I think that comes, but like just how
It's
many
not
companies?
definitely not there yet for sure.
Yeah,
It's
totally.
very
Right.
yeah. I think the middle step there might be where the agent goes and says, "Hey, I need access to this tool," and then it pauses at that point, and the tool request from an agent gets reviewed, maybe by a human, maybe by another agent, right? And it goes, oh, okay, yeah, this makes sense. Let's go and implement this. Whoever's implementer, it doesn't really matter, right?
Yeah.
Once it's done, once it's approved, it goes back to the agent, and the agent can execute it. And at that point, the tool gets added to maybe an approved list of tools for that
Yep.
agent or whatever it is, right?
There is going to be a fascinating, like for the next couple years, there's going to be a tool chain that emerges for scaling human in the loop that is going to be really interesting, right? Yeah.
I mean, you can just imagine, right? An agent requesting a tool, another agent writing and creating that tool, another agent testing that tool, that tool going back to the actual tool approved tool registry, and there's a check mark. This tool is done, so that agent and or any other agent in your ecosystem will never have to rewrite the tool again, potentially, right?
Yep.
They can just go and reuse it. So, but it is scary, right?
Yeah, it is. Like so just like because we're closing out the time here, like one thing that Christian was talking about, I thought like that was very cool. I hadn't seen some of those like attack vectors that he was talking about, and like it was really cool. And it was interesting because I think he in the diagrams and he even discussed some solutions to that, but we never like I think we almost have another session like as a follow-up because there's some other strategies to go attack those that we should talk about. And I think we have some cool stuff actually to demo there. So maybe in the next session or the one after we can do that because the whole concept of like curation and that kind of thing, I think is going to be a powerful tool in the toolbox there that we can demo next time.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
All right. Well, let's close it out then. I just want to mention we do have on kagent.dev/community. If you go to their website, we have a list of past events that we've done, upcoming events, but also for you, there's a way to like suggest any future topics that you want us to talk about, either on Discord or just opening an issue on GitHub. And yeah, any closing thoughts from you guys?
I think I'm just excited to continue to see where all this goes because it's so it feels like we're at a real inflection point and it's very exciting.
Yeah.
I'll just continue my commercial for we continue to have a lot of folks like tune in and ask questions. Like if there's topics that you want to see in future iterations of the live stream, please let us know. We really want to we're all learning from one another here.
Yeah.
Like every new customer that we work with, that we talk to at conferences, it's like we're like, it's so fast moving, and there's so many different perspectives on how people will actually operationalize this and get into production. Love to get your input there, and even if you want to come on and talk with us on the live stream, we'd love to have you.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah.
Agreed.
All right. Thanks everyone. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Talk to you.